Hello everyone, and welcome to My Story, a tale of translation, a series where we analyze the Japanese-English translation of Final Fantasy X and share some secrets from the Japanese Ultimania Omega. So this is the second video in this series, and if you haven't checked out the first one, then you might want to start there. But that being said, you can also just watch this video or any future video in this series that features a part of the game you're interested in. But I do want to thank the people who watched the video, especially those who pointed out some minor errors with the subtitles. Thanks for watching so intently, and I've now put the corrections down beneath the video as a pinned comment, so hopefully that will make up for it a bit. But I do really find it somewhat amazing that people actually do watch the videos that we make, even though we've been doing this for more than a year now. Hopefully you'll watch this one as well, and maybe learn something new about a game we all know and love. But enough about that, let's get on with the story.
Oi! Oi!
So we're sticking with the color coding, green implying a fairly faithful translation, while yellow and red imply some sort of deviation. And I just want to make a point of it here that according to the Ultimania, this is not in fact Dream Sanakant, but rather Tidus being transported inside of Sin, this vision being a sort of in-flight entertainment on the way there to Spira.
いろいろ考えてたのは覚えてる。俺どうなるんだとか、ここどこだよとか、そのうち頭がぼーっとしてきてさ、なんだか眠くなって、夢を見た気がする。一人ぼっちになる夢。誰でもいいからそばにいてほしい。そんな気にさせる夢だった。
So I'm not really sure about the significance of this dream, be it in the English or the Japanese version, but I do find it a bit interesting that the Japanese version emphasizes the concept of the dream a bit more than the English version, mentioning it 3 times instead of just 2 times. And this is of course very interesting considering what we later learn about Tidus. Tidus of course being a total dream boy.
誰かいる？アーロン！わー！
And now we're going to compile a complete Albed dictionary so that we'll be able to understand everything that the Albed are saying. I was actually hoping for a bit more flavor text, like what we got with the Traveler's Save Sphere in the Japanese version, but this is just basically the same thing. This was interesting though. So the English version of this loading screen has this little warning, loading, do not quit the game, while the Japanese version just says, loading. Why is this? I don't know. Is this interesting? I thought it was interesting. No? Oh well. So not a lot of difference here, except that the Japanese, no, not the Japanese, the Albed language is the thing that is different. Because the Albed language is a sort of cipher language, so based on whether you're playing the game in English or Japanese, the Albed language is going to be different. And that's why we have the word Sigdan in English for master and Yanusa in Japanese. Yanusa being based on the Japanese word master or the loan word, and Sigdan being based on the English word master. But let's go put our mastery of the Albed language to the test right away. So this is an Albed riddle that leads to a pillar in the Thunder Plains, which has a password for a weapon you can get for Auron later in the game. And it's a bit interesting that the English version rhymes a bit like a poem, but I guess that's a part of the sort of localization, where it makes it sound a bit more like a riddle. So even if you have compiled all the Albed primers, Tidus is just going to say the same thing both in English and Japanese, which is a bit of a shame because it would have been really nice to get some sort of acknowledgement for having become a master of the Albed language. But we're of course going to benefit in other ways later on in this video when we get to meet the Albed and understand every word that they are saying. It's going to be amazing. So these are of course the ruins of Baaj's temple, a former church of Yevon, a former temple of the Church of Yevon, and down in the water there we can see the statues of the High Summoners. And one sort of really interesting thing from the Ultimania Omega, which has sort of become common knowledge, is the sort of true history of Spira, where one of the really strange and surprising things is that there haven't really been all that many High Summoners, which maybe isn't that surprising if you were really paying attention and noticed that there are just 4 statues in every temple. But for me personally, it's something that I never really noticed or picked up on, because it just seemed to me that if you only had 4 High Summoners in 1,000 years, it seems like you wouldn't really put that much faith in the Church of Yevon, especially since you imagine that people are dying left and right and not really becoming all that old, like with the original concept for Final Fantasy X, where everyone was supposed to die at the age of 17. So even that's not the case anymore. You imagine that in a world plagued by sin, everyone is dying, and in that kind of world, 1,000 years is a particularly long time. So only having a few High Summoners seems like not enough, really. But that's the way it is. So just in case you're studying Japanese and you're curious about what Tidus is saying here, it's actually deceptively simple. It's just masui desu, masui desu, masuisu. So it's a contracted form of masui and desu. And he does this quite a lot, so you can look out for that as we continue our journey through Spira. What statue is this? Is this like the forgotten High Summoner or something? Or some leftovers from a more ancient religion? And yes, I am aware that there hasn't been all that much Japanese in this video as of yet, but that's going to change very soon with some nice reveals, I think. So stay tuned for that. Swim, Tidus, swim for your life!
事態はどんどん悪くなっていく。夢も希望もありません。
Here we can see some very interesting differences, I feel. And I must say that I prefer the Japanese version, even though I am very partial to the English line. This is the line that taught me the English saying, out of the frying pan and into the fire, even though it sort of plays around with it a little bit. However, if we look at the Japanese line, we can see something different going on, as Tidus talks about there being no dreams or hope. And we'll see this in context with the next line, which makes it into something very special, I feel.
そんな気にさせる場所だと思った。
So Tidus seems to experience Baaj's temple as a place void of hope and dreams, which we can of course take at face value. But we can also remember that Baaj's temple is where Seymour and his mother were sent into exile. So the previous line might have been made in reference not only to Tidus' predicament, but also to the tragedy of Seymour's life, this being the place where his hopes and dreams died. Look at Tidus being all super strong, moving large chunks of debris like it was nothing. Let me examine you. Here we have a very Guado-looking door, which is surprising since this is the temple that Geosgaeno was overseeing. Look at it! And there we have the first symbol of Japan, I think, in the game. Again, if you're learning Japanese or if you're interested in playing JRPGs in Japanese, here's something worth committing to memory, because this is something you see all over the place. So, tenireru, which literally means something like put in hand, is a common turn of phrase inside and outside of games, meaning to obtain something. And we're going to be obtaining a few things here, so let's go do that. Ultimania time. So here's a thing I didn't know personally, but I really like. So according to the Ultimania, if you check the withered bouquet in the list of key items, it will say "Dareka ga kokoro o komete tsukutta," or in English, someone poured their heart into making this. It goes on to clarify that this someone was actually Seymour, back when he was living there with his mother. It even notes that we can see these flowers still alive when we acquire Anima later in the game and get a flashback of Seymour in the temple. And that's a really nice detail, I think, that gives some meaningful context to something that might otherwise appear inconsequential. Thanks, Ultimania. I know we could just skip this part, but I guess we're going to be going together to pick up a high potion. Lucky you. Wow, we did it. Now, let's go do the opposite of what Billy Joel would do, and let's go start that fire. You can sort of see some scribbling on the floor here, and even though I just get a headache trying to make it out, some amazing people have actually squinted their eyes super hard to get us some pretty interesting information. So apparently the writing here spells out salam, as in Guado salam, and then Discal Guado. We don't know who wrote this, but we can assume it was either Seymour or his mother, my money being on Seymour. So if we count the Japanese line about this being a place of no hope and dreams, the backstory of the withered bouquet, and the writing on the floor, we have three very interesting allusions to Seymour Guado very early on in the game, which is great because I personally really like Seymour, and I wish we could see more of him.
腹減った。今日は何?
Just like in the first video with the dialogue between Auron and Tidus, the Japanese version seems to give a bit clearer picture of their relationship in Sanakant. Kyo wa nani, or what is it today, seems to imply that Auron is used to checking in on Tidus, and that Tidus is also used to it himself. While what do you want could just as well be a one-time thing.
つまらないミスだったな。明らかにお前のせいで負けた。
そんなこと言いに来たのかよ。
今日は命日だ。
Here the Japanese version is a bit more specific, mentioning the anniversary of Jack's death specifically, although we can already sort of guess what they are talking about in English after listening to the DJ back in Dream Sanakant go on and on about what happened to Jack. One thing I found interesting is that, according to the Ultimania, the international version in Japan changed this sentence to Arekara 10年だ, which is basically a translation of the English version back into Japanese, meaning it's been 10 years since then. But does that mean this version isn't based on the international version? According to the Final Fantasy Wiki, Kazushika Nojima, the game's screenwriter, changed all the mentions of machines to machina in the Japanese international version, presumably another influence of the English translation making its way back into the Japanese one. So it will be interesting to see what word will be used here in the remaster for machines or machina. I imagine we're going to hear it once we reach Bhed Island in the next video, so that's something to look forward to. Stay tuned!
ああ、
一人で泣いているかとな。
泣くかよ。
泣いてたよ。
So before we saw some clearly Guado-inspired artwork on a door, but I'm not really sure what this is supposed to be. Any ideas? Let me know down in the comments below. Maybe it's a reference to the monster we're about to face?
おい、なんだよ。消えちゃう気か？いや、ちょっと待ってくれ。なんか探してくるから。勘弁してくれよ。
I definitely should have used the save sphere to heal myself, even though I wasn't going to save. But oh well, we'll use a potion. Spider cut! I guess we don't have to worry about the meaning behind that door anymore. Now we just have to worry about who's behind the door. Phew! It's just a local bondage club. And we're skipping the grenade tutorial and going straight for some more dialogue. Not to mention some very tasteful cinematography. Here I feel like the Japanese is a bit more open to interpretation, either referring to the battle that just concluded, or to Tidus believing that he's being saved from being stranded in the temple. So this masked Albert is really intense in the English version for some reason. They are the same in death. It's a very hardcore translation choice. Also, why do they think Tidus might be a fiend in disguise? Like, is that really something they've come across before? Or is this supposed to be a reference to the unsent? It seems a bit strange. We have had some minor pieces of dialogue that haven't been translated before, pieces that have basically been left out. These are generally some grunts or the like, and it isn't really surprising that they've been left out, since there does seem to be a tendency in English localization from Japanese to disregard some of the in-between moaning that is common in Japanese. This, however, feels like it could have been translated, since it is an actual word, and if you learn Japanese, you might catch yourself saying this when you get hurt, even though you're not in Japan anymore, and it just makes people look at you funny. Ite! Ite!
土佐吐きるくせの
言ってんだよ。
ゾルモハ耳は
参った。
コーヒコンアルシンキの
全然わかんね
カンハミョは
わかんねえっての。
This is a bit interesting because this is actually a faithful translation of this specific line. However, the problem is that unlike in the Japanese version, Tidus didn't actually say that he didn't understand. In English, he said, right, whatever, before, while in the Japanese, he actually said that he didn't understand.
シラヤ
やっせ仕事を手伝えば少しの間は世話してあげるってさ。
お前、言葉わかるのか？
Again, that masked I'll bet is intense.
わかった、働くよ。
ゴフキスまたるラジオフシアエモ
This English Albert is also on the more intense side of things, since he only wants us to use a potion if we're really near death. Stingy bastard.
そうだ
I really love the sphere grid, and I wish the Crystarium in Final Fantasy XIII was more like the sphere grid, but I'm not going to go into the translation of the tutorial because I'm not insane.
海の底に昔の遺跡があるの。今は動いてないけど多分まだエネルギーが残ってる。潜ってってちょいちょいってやれば遺跡が復活して海底に沈んでるあれを引き上げられると思うんだよね。
Here, the Japanese version uses a classic Japanese trick to create mystery by saying are, meaning that, without specifying what is being talked about. You hear this a lot in anime and the like, where characters say stuff like ano hito, meaning that person, without directly specifying who they are talking about. This way we understand that there is something important there without getting to know what it actually is. I know the English Rikku talks about a big prize, but I couldn't care less about their big prize. While with are, now you got my attention.
じゃあお仕事頑張ろう。
うっす。
Under the sea, down in the ocean. We might use a potion, but only if we're really near death. Yes, we need to save them for near-death experiences, really. So don't get too excited. Also, we're just going to kind of skip the ocean part because they're not really speaking. Except we might maybe look at the airship a little bit because that's the are that they were talking about before. Look at that airship.
Yumishi hikudemu mategi samo Shinoruma sakaki atsa Lase guftas lichiwa de muhua Noyanema hosoga
なんだよ。手伝っただろ。 腹減った。
What do you guys think of the voice acting, by the way? I personally quite like James Arnold Taylor as the English voice of Tidus, and I think he does an excellent job with what he's given. However, Masakaze Morita, who does his Japanese voice, is just as excellent. Morita has also voiced characters such as Ichigo Kurosaki from Bleach, but it's interesting that Morita was originally just intended to provide the motion capture for Tidus, later ending up getting the role after more than 100 people auditioned and no voice actor was chosen, this role being a very big step in his career.
おお、飯。
はいよ。焦って食べるからだよ。何さ。
あなたのお名前は？
Nuance is also present a little bit in the English version, I feel, but you really get the sense in the Japanese version that Tidus is making his speech really simple and direct to verify whether she can truly understand him, which he of course does.
リュックだよ。
So, Rikku is actually Rikku in Japanese, which literally means backpack, but I don't think that her name is meant to reference that. Personally, I always think of the Ryukyu Islands, which might also make sense because Final Fantasy X already borrows from Okinawan. Tira apparently meaning sun in Okinawan, and Yuna meaning sea hibiscus, a type of flower. The Ryukyu Islands have also suffered their fair bit of discrimination, for example with attempts by the Meiji government back in the day to suppress their Ryukyuan ethnic identity, tradition, culture, and last but not least, language, in order to assimilate the Ryukyuan people as Japanese. I haven't read anything about this being the real meaning behind Rikku's name, but it is something that gets connected inside my brain. What do you think, and what do you think of Rikku's Japanese name in general?
おお、本当に通じるよ。おお。
も
でもそれなら最初から普通に話してくれよな。
うそんな余裕なかったんだよ。みんな血のこと魔物だと思ってて。
血って。
あ、血は君って意味。
Here we can see some fun wordplay in the English version, playing around with how the Albert word for you sounds like we. This coupled with a Macarena temple joke later on in the game makes for some on-point word humor.
あんたたち何者？
アルベド族だよ。言葉でわかるでしょ？
In the Japanese version, Rikku or Ryukku stresses the language as what differentiates them from others. If we really think about this line, we could therefore deduce that not everyone in this brave new world speaks like they do. And since Rikku can talk with Tidus, we can assume that there are others who might understand Tidus, who don't speak Albert then. Look at me being all Sherlock Holmes about something that doesn't really matter all that much.
ねえ、君アルベド嫌いじゃないの？
嫌いも何も知らない。
Again, we have some very tasteful and really subtle cinematography going on here. Really spectacular work that will no doubt stand the test of time.
どっから来たの？
ザナルカンドだよ。俺そこでブリッツの選手やっててさ。ザナルカンドエーブスのエース。
もしかして頭を強く打つとかした？
あんたたちに殴られた。
じゃあその前のこと覚えてる？
ザナルカンドのこと、試合や生活のこと。 ブリッツボールの試合の時にシンが襲ってきたこと、そしてアーロンのせいで逃げ遅れて光に包まれて。
It's interesting how in the Japanese version, Tidus goes on to mention it being Auron's fault they didn't escape, which it kind of was.
思いつくままに話したけど、そのうち不安になってきたんだ。俺変なこと言ってんのか？
シンに近づいたんだ。大丈夫、きっとすぐ治るよ。シンに近づきすぎた人間は頭がぐるぐるしちゃうんだって。だから君も変な夢みたいの見ただけじゃないかな。
俺病気ってこと？
シンの毒気にやられたんだと思う。
Here the conversation is reframed a bit in the English version. So in the English version, Rikku is simply telling him what is wrong with him, while in the Japanese version, she is positing a theory about what she thinks happened to him.
なんで？
だってザナルカンなんて今もうないんだもん。1000年前にシンが暴れて壊しちゃった。だからブリッツボールなんてできないよ。
え？どういうことだよ。1000年前って。俺シンがザナルカンドを襲うの見たんだぞ。あれが1000年前だってのか。信じらんないって、そんなの。
あのさ、ブリッツの選手なんでしょ？
うん。
ルカへ行けばなんとかなるかもよ。君を知ってる人いるかもしれないし、君も何か思い出すかもしれないもんね。
ルカ？
よーし、私に任せなさい。ルカに連れてってあげるよ。行きたくないの？じゃあみんなに話してくるからちょっと待ってて。あ、それから注意。ザナルカンドから来たなんて人には言わない方がいいよ。
So the Japanese version here is a bit softer, I feel, with Rikku just giving Tidus advice, while the English Rikku is telling him sort of that he shouldn't talk about Sanakant, because some people might take offense.
あそこはエボンの聖なる土地だから怒る人いると思うんだ。
ザナルカンドはエボンの聖なる土地。なんのこってすかって感じだった。エボン？真の毒気？ルカ？どこか遠くへ来ただけだと思ってた。すぐに帰れると思ってた。1000年の時を超えたってか？信じられるかっつーの！もう！
And that will be it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time when we wake up on Bhed Island. My favorite thing from this video was probably all the stuff with Seymour, but what did you find interesting? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click that bell if you haven't already to stay updated and stuff. But until next time, caca!